When Andrew Cripps, the Minister for Natural Resources and Mines, came to Longreach in November 2012, he caused a stir. Minister Cripps foreshadowed the demise of the current Queensland Wild Rivers Act and opened for discussion what he described as small-scale irrigation in the rivers of the outback. A meeting was called in the Channel Country town of Windora for the 1st of February. A town with a population of 90 saw 39 people attend the meeting.
They are cranky about this new government's bloody proposals.
Bob Morrish is the chair of the Coopers Creek Protection Group, the conveners of the Windora meeting. The group was established in the mid-90s within hours of the announcement to grow irrigated cotton on the floodplains of the Cooper. The passion on the floodplains has not changed, and once more, the Windora meeting had a strong message.
The extraction of water for irrigation, whether small scale, large scale or any scale at all, is an immediate threat.
A further reaction to the LNP government's intentions came in late February with a 3-day conference in Longreach.
This has been a very, very important couple of days to actually combine the traditional knowledge of the Aboriginal peoples across the basin with the pastoralists that live up and down the basin, with tourism operators and with some of the best scientists in hydrology and ecology and river systems from around the world. We had scientists from New Mexico, University of New Mexico that have worked on the Cooper. We've had really high quality of people.
We're talking about one of the world's great desert river systems, and the sorts of decisions that are being made or could be made now could ultimately lead us down a path where we could lose it.
Professor Richard Kingsford is one of Australia's leading ecological scientists. He's been studying the rivers of inland Australia for more than 30 years.
There's a clear signal that this government wants to foster small-scale irrigation. It has set up a committee to advise on protection of the rivers, but the writing instructions are for allowing small-scale irrigation. And I guess the real challenge is, what's the definition of small-scale? How many small-scale make a large-scale? And ultimately, what's the transparency in terms of the impact on the ecosystems, and all the way down through the Channel Country to South Australia and Lake Eyre, of course. And not just the ecosystem, but there are a lot of people that depend on this river system, from landholders, graziers, floodplain graziers, through to the tourism operators. And I guess my real belief and hope is that we chart a much more sustainable path.
The Queensland Government made a pre-election promise to trash the Wild Rivers Act on the state's northern rivers. The fragile desert rivers have been caught up by the threat because its own set of protective legislation comes under the same legislative title as the Northern Gulf and Cape Rivers.
The new government has made a commitment to lift the Wild Rivers legislation and replace it with a new framework. To help advise that, they've set up the Western Rivers Advisory Panel, on which I sit. And I'm very pleased to be involved in that process, and I think it's an important process.
The Western Rivers Advisory Panel, or RAP, has come under criticism because of its narrow spectrum of representation in the consultation process. The current Wild Rivers legislation that specifically covers the rivers of the Lake Eyre Basin is the result of a long and, at times, angry debate within the community to thrash out the details.
After years and years of consultative effort on the part of the last government, years of consultation, we had a good process in place, and the Wild Rivers Act and the Wild River Declarations would have ensured the long-term protection of these rivers. And the process this new government's going through is just a bloody sham. They're pretending to consult, but they've picked who they want to consult with. They've thrown off conservation reps. They've made sure that other moderate people on that group are not there anymore. They're a bloody disgrace, if you ask me.
There really has been this overall community government partnership about protecting these rivers, and then we seem to have suddenly jagged off in a different direction.
There's huge challenges that exist up in the north because they got one person up there that's kind of speaking on their behalf, and sometimes I feel really strongly that sometimes his opinion is impacting me and my country, and that annoys the hell out of me.
The battle to make the Wild Rivers Declaration for the Western Rivers workable is seen by many as worthwhile.
Fundamentally, the things that are important within that legislation are the things that protect the river. And they focus on not increasing the take from the river system, but also importantly, they deal with the other critical issue that water legislation doesn't do very well, and that is, how do you stop deleterious, degrading practices on the floodplain? We know these floodplains are so critical for the health of the system, and we know that when the water goes across those floodplains, it flows where it needs to flow, down the channel systems. As soon as you put up roads, levees, turkey's nest dams, even, heaven forbid, a large mine, you're going to fundamentally change that equation.
An equation that already delivers a $1 billion suite of industries to the Western Rivers without putting them at risk.
Well, the rivers give us actually the asset that can't be duplicated anywhere else in the world. And also, I think the nature of this country with its isolation and its diversity give us that proposition to the consumer that it's pretty special. We go stopping river flows and upset that balance of the biodiversity, we're really going to be in trouble as far as having that market edge.
Tourism currently brings significant revenue and jobs into the communities of the Western Rivers. Alan Smith is an award-winning tourism operator.
The Lake Eyre Basin is far bigger and beyond the protection of National Park. A lot of it's under private ownership and under laws and legislation and acts that can be undermined by different people, and it's time that we actually put a nice solid basin there to firm that up and have an institution that we've heard about this morning where it can be set in stone to protect this area properly.
The Lake Eyre Basin Under the Spotlight conference in Longreach heard papers and stories from a wide range of scientists and pastoralists.
The Cooper was folklore in our home because in 1949, long before I was born, I might add, my father swam 600 bullocks across the flooded Cooper on the Birdsall track. No one had done that for 30 years, and it did make the Advertiser in Adelaide, and my maternal grandmother said, at least you could have had a shave.
An important contribution was made by the Aboriginal traditional owners from the rivers. One of the speakers was Mythica man Scott Goren.
If there's possible development out in this area, I want the development to be focused on how do we look after country and not how we bloody destroy it. And I think potentially with mining and potentially with irrigation, any kind of irrigation you want to look at, potentially you're destroying river and destroying country, and I don't want any part of that.
A communique was drafted at the conclusion of the conference and has been sent to the Queensland State Government. And the message coming from the Spotlight Conference was clear.
Leave the current legislation alone, back off, and just leave these rivers run free.
Well, the big message is that these rivers are incredibly important, they're incredibly fragile, there is no wastewater, there is no such thing as small irrigation because irrigation over time grows, and we've got to be very, very careful with the resources sector in how it interacts and make sure that it doesn't do damage to our rivers and floodplains in the long term.